say it's the same color hackle. Is that? I'll try
Uh,
to do that.
yeah,
All across the
well, I
board.
save them for a couple other flies. I tie Royal Trudes also,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll save them for the Royal Trudes. I'll preen the hackles into shape that I want them, and every once in a while there's one or two fibers that that pop out that you don't like, so you just sneak in there and trim them out. There was two in there that I didn't care for. I didn't put my fast dry on it. Oh, I forgot. Oh well.
You say there's better flies than Royal Wolf. What are you trying to wean them to?
If they like white wings like this, I always say Sable Wolf.
Sable wolf?
Yeah,
Okay.
because that fur body is a better floater and a lot tougher. But with the floss, dampen the floss all the time, and you'll find that you won't snag it as often. And it's pretty clean, so I always run it through my mouth and get it down to the point where it'll handle a lot
You just
easier.
wet it and double the strand over, huh?
That's all.
Question now on when you're stacking.
Okay.
Now you use that cartridge for stacking.
Mm-hmm.
How come you didn't use that big one?
Because it's too big and the individual fibers are short enough, they'd be laying in there all askew. They might go in there flat.
So you're saying, my question is, and something I have a problem with, is lots of times when I'm tying, say, 18s and 20 comparadons, I'm using a large stacker. That's probably one of my problems.
Big problem, you bet.
Because the shorter stacker would allow you to.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Once you start using one of these little stackers, you'll never go back to the big one again for little stuff.
Okay.
What do you do? Just put your hair in and then just tap the
this-
whole block and do 2 dozen at once, huh?
Yeah, you
I
bet.
see that.
Yeah.
There's a difference because it's.
And it's kind of nice to be tying and not have to stop and grab a piece of calf skin and play around with it. I mean, you reach over and you grab one of your little containers and you got just the right amount, And when I do elk hairs and Royal Wolves in size 16s, I put enough calf hair in for 2 flies. Or enough elk hair in for 2 flies, okay? And when I take it out the first time, I have an extra one of these sitting there, and I'll run my dubbing needle right in the middle and pull half of them away, and I'll stick half in here, and I'll take half and put in the other, and I've done 2. Because it's just as easy to stack a large amount, I do that with comparadons also. I always cut enough for 2 comparadons, and size 16s, 2 calf tail or calf body hair wings, or for elk hair, 2 calf elk hair wings for elk hair calves. Okay. Let's see what we got next on our program here. Goofus bug, Goddard caddis. Okay, we're doing good. How are we doing time-wise? Okay. But some of this stuff is strictly going to be pictures.
You do slides on this next set?
Wait a minute. Yeah, there's going to be slides on this next bunch. Okay.
Give me a second.
Okay. Okay, now we're going to be talking about hair wings like on a goofus bug. If you look at this is whitetail. That's coastal deer hair. If you compare the length of the black section with the length of the black section. Compare the length of tan with the tan here. Again, scaling materials for the size fly you're tying. If you want them to look a little nicer. If you want to have that multicolored wing in, if you tie a 16 and tie it in right here, you're going to end up with just black and tan. But if you use coastal, you're going to have gray, tan, and black. You're going to have all the colors in. So I was just trying to show the different, how different materials from different animals will give you a little better marking, and maybe have the fly look a little nicer. On goofus bugs, I stack a hair wing, tie it in, come back and tie a tail in, This I've been using for the hump. I've been using elk body hair because it's tougher, it's bigger diameter, and for floating characteristics, I think it's better than deer. Deer is kind of weak compared to elk, the individual fibers. And I'm not a real fan of humpies anyway, because you'll see, I'm going to spend more time on what I do like. But this whole thing, I wind it down real good with wraps of tying thread, so you have a body. You can make red, you can make green, yellow. Some people want, they say, make my humpies with a red body. Just red thread is what you do. No big deal. And a lot of people say, when you tie that thing, you tie the wings sticking out the back, you come back and you tie a tail in, and you wind this from the wings, you wind that back and flop it over to make this part, or some people tie it in here, leave it out, and you flop it over and come up and stand the ends up to make the wings. I have difficulty keeping the wings the proper length when I do that. And that's such a hassle that I just tie the wings in, and I'll flop this over and I'll tie it down, and I'll just trim these loose hairs off real quick, and I'll get a good hump on the goofus, and I've got my wings the same length all the time. I've seen some of the stuff tied the other way, and it is really ugly stuff, and I don't think I'd want to associate myself with some of the ties I see. Grizzly and brown hackle, and since I use a yellow thread for under here, I use a yellow head to finish the body on. If you can tie that fine, you can also tie ginger goofus, and it's just a matter of using different color, using cream elk from the rump of a bull elk. This is a stacked or a clipped hair type of thing, a Goddard caddis. The first thing you do is you trim off a pretty healthy bunch, and this is a tying thread. This is what we're going to tie next. And you make 2 wraps around here, and we're going to stack this first bundle. And you pull it up real tight, and pull the hair back so that this hair is only on top of the hook. Now, pictorially, it's hard to show this, but the hair is only on the upper half of the hook, okay? Then the rest of it, I'm going to spin hair in front of here, a whole bunch of bundles. And every bundle that I do, I'm going to take a compressor and push it back to get it as densely packed as I can. The trimming. I use 3 different cutting devices. I have 3 pairs of scissors and a razor blade. My first cut is always on the belly with a curved pair of scissors, big heavy bladed scissors. The next cut with the same set, notice the heaviness of those scissors, is a little taper cut all the way around. So I got the belly done and I've got this part. These scissors are put away and not used again for that fly. The next cut is with a straight pair of scissors, and I cut down through the body to get a basic shape started. Then I do the last cutting with a razor blade. I use my other wearing scissors for a little bit of cutting, so I use 3 pairs of scissors and a razor blade to cut these things. They're not a quick fly to tie. I charge a premium price for them, and I tie them down to size 16. I even tie my size 16s with a thread, so I can get a really, a tight pack, very tough fly. When I finish them off, I always make sure I have enough clearance with a razor blade underneath here, because I've seen Goddard casts. If you look into some shops, you'll see where they've got the clipped hair so full it cuts the gap off between the belly and the hook point, so that you couldn't hook a fish unless it was, really lucky, and you might just lip hook it. So I want a good gap in here, so I cut the body off with a razor blade right across the belly of that thing. There's the finished thing ready for hackle. Notice the big heavy A thread. Now I add an antenna in my hackle, and I have my Goddard caddis all finished. So I'm going to tie this one. Okay, this is a whole different story. We could write a book on parachutes.
Good. That can be your second book.
Second book, Parachute Drive-Bys. I love
Needs to be written, I'll tell you.
I had a little trick that, like I was telling you before, Tim Sullivan from Butte showed me a little trick that was really clever. And I thought, by God, I couldn't wait to get home to try it out, and it worked wonders. And I just changed little things that I did, and it just worked super. I'm going to tie this on a number 10 hook. And on certain flies, I put a little smaller hackle. And I put a number 12 hackle on another number 10 Goddard caddis. I think I just like the way it looks a little better, and I like the way it fishes more than anything else. If you want, when you tie your tying thread on, you could decide where your body's going to end and start your heavy A thread there instead of going, you know, right from the eye of the hook. And that way it'll give you an indication when it's time to, you know, finish your hair, put the last group on. This thing is a stacker. You can make one of these. You can take a lot of things. You can take a toothbrush and drill a hole. Drill a hole in the handle on a toothbrush a little bit bigger so that you can push back on it. This thing has 2 different size holes. Darwin Atkins from California makes this thing. He gave it to me, so I've been using it, and it works out real fine. Now this is a nice hollow deer hair that'll flare real nice. Remember what I was telling you, this first bunch is merely going to be stacked on the top. I don't want to spin it around. I'll take the heavier sections near the butt and I'll put a couple wraps around it and I'll pinch it and I'll really pull this up tight. And you notice it didn't spin around the hook, it stayed right up on top. Put about 3 wraps in front of it, a shot of varnish in there, and then I'll take and put a few more wraps now of a little finer hair. I'm going to spin this stuff all around pretty much like I did that head on that kiwi. Remember, the secret is not to put 2 wraps but not too much pressure so that that thing will spin around on you real nice and easy. Then every bunch you tie in, reach in there, and you can let your thread tension drop off a little bit occasionally so that you can sort of distribute that stuff around there by hand a little nicer, and that'll work pretty easy. This looks like we're going to have to go 2 more bunches on here. Number 10s are, like I say, it's not a good money making fly, unfortunately. I don't talk it up. I'll tell you what it's a good fly for. If you're fishing with people that have a tendency to do a poor job of managing their fly, keeping it afloat, okay? It's a great fly for them because it does float a little better without paying as much attention. If they suck it under the water, they can pull it out and you can bring it in, squeeze it flat, and get the water out of it and throw it back out and it's floating again. So by managing, that's what I'm talking about, is it's easier to keep the thing afloat. Okay, that'll do the whole fly right there. When people that don't fish watch me do this, they say, "You mean you're going to cut it all off?" Yep. Why'd you put it on? John Goddard in the original pattern did this a little bit different also. He used to leave one end of this thread hanging out, and when you trim the fly you had to be very careful because you didn't want to cut that piece of thread off, because when it was all done, trimmed into shape, he would take that thread and put dubbing on it and make it an underlayment so it represented the body of the caddis. But I don't even tell people about that. I don't want anybody to know.
Masochist.
Don't ask me. Okay, our cutting tools then are going to be right here. We're going to have a heavy bladed scissors, a razor blade, what I'm wearing in here. And the cutting, you get into a cutting pattern so that...
you slide just a little bit.
I beg your pardon?
Slide that way just a little bit.
Oh, okay. You get a cutting pattern. When I'm doing dozens of these things, in fact, I don't even do dozens of them because I find this fly depressing to tie. I keep thinking, God, you're losing so much money, Al.
That's encouraging that you find certain patterns depressing to tie.
Yeah, really. And you know what I do? Like, if I have 10 dozen Goddard caddis to tie, when I'm through tying my daily schedule, I'll tie 1 dozen Goddards that day. and 1 dozen the next day, and 1 dozen the next day, until they're done, and they go away, and I pretend like I didn't know they were here.
You ever try to take them out of your catalog? Or do you ever?
Oh yeah, yeah, I've tried that trick.
Try raising the price so high until you.
Yeah, we've tried. It didn't, you know what happened? You sold more. My business on some new customers got so bad that I had so many people, and I thought, geez, I can't handle this all. So I put a $500 maximum per calendar year on fly orders. I thought, this will stop them. Backfired. You know what happened? People that bought $140 worth of flies were now buying $198 worth of flies. They were pushing the max. And I thought, oh, come on, you know? And it just, I had a real hectic year one year because it just got plumb out of hand. A razor blade to trim this bottom flat on here. And you sneak around, and right where that last bunch of hair was put on there. Okay, now, and you pull this back into shape so that when you take your regular scissors now and you start cutting, it's a little easier job. And basically what we're going to do is just follow the main taper that we've cut in there. And don't try to grab too much hair. Usually when I ruin one of these things, I get over anxious because I hate the thought of tying them. And I start off and I start trimming too much hair and I scalp one. And very quick I wake up to the fact that, hey, no, I gotta play this game fair. But like I say, the fly is a floater. There's no two ways about it. Okay, I got a basic taper. The finishing job is done with a pair of, with a razor blade. This thing, I'll push all the hair fibers in together, and I'll cut a little taper up the backside. And like I say, this cutting pattern is pretty important because if you do every one of these the same, you'll find that they're not really as bad as what they seem. In fact, believe it or not, I like the size 16s more than I like this size because on a size 16 there's less hair that goes on it. Now for the final work, it's just a matter of taking your razor blade and sliding it up along the taper, and what it does is just any square edges or facets that you have on there, you eliminate them. But it's a durable fly, and it's not a bad fish catcher. John Goddard, the originator of this thing, would be fishing with me. He and his wife this year. And he had a nice compliment. He said, I like your elk hair caddis better than mine. He thought he liked the way I trimmed them, and he liked the color of deer hair I used. So that was kind of a...
I put a few rubber legs on there and show.
and lead.
And a
Rubber
red
legs
tail.
sticking out on the side.
And a red fur strip tail.
There you go.
We could drive him crazy. Like I say, it's you know what it is too. When you start tying these things, after you tie the first couple, the rest of them really go easy. And there it is. The body's trimmed to where as far as I'm going to take it. That's good enough, I feel. Now I change tying threads, and I'll go with a brown tying thread. Get my light back into the right place. Now let's see if I brought all my goodies with me here.
Apple stems.
I see, oh, here we go. For the way Goddard used to tie this thing, and he would use the hackle stem as the antenna. And as you know, hackle stems break real easy if they're dry. So what I did is I just take a stacker and I take a bunch of bear hair. And instead of tying hackle stems in, I would take a couple strands of bear hair, and what you do, you lock these in just like you lock wire, mono. You tie them in and they're pointing to the back. Notice they're back over the back of the hook, and then you pull them forward, okay? And now they're locked in So they're not going to come out of there at all. Okay. Now we'll tie a couple
That
hackle
makes them
in.
a little smaller, not quite so imposing as some of those
Yeah, right.
stems can be too. They look
Yeah, some of the stems are so heavy that they look kind of ridiculous.
yeah, they get way too big out there. They look like a canoe paddle up front.
And like I say, this gets to be a rough water fly. So I generally hackle, and remember I was telling you, I high grade size 16, long, good looking hackle that I can get maybe 10 wraps of hackle with. And what I'll do is save those for like Goddard caddis, Royal Wolf size 16s, Goddard 16s, and what have you, so I only have to use one hackle. If you're lucky enough sometimes to find Hoffman saddle hackles that are of the very narrow variety, they do a nice job, because some of them are size 16 and they're 3 feet long. Not quite, but you know, if you've seen some of the Hoffman saddle patches, generally I look them over real carefully and I buy up every one I find, because somewhere along the line they're really nice to work with. And you're going to get yourself a real decent if you keep looking for them. Okay. In fact, I think what I'm putting on now here is Hoffman saddle. Okay. And it's nice when you can do that with your fingers instead of a hackle plier. And when you're finishing your fly, don't be afraid to grab your hackle fibers and just pull them all back out of the way and wind your thread up to and against the last couple turns of hackle you made. It gets rid of a lot of those little stray hairs that you have sticking out all over, and you know, I think it'll make a nice looking job. And then sort of preen this thing into a shape that you want it. And if there's some hairs, like here's one that, you know, I don't like that one, then let's see. Anytime you find a couple in here that sort of stick out, there's always a couple ornery ones. And don't fight them when you're winding. When you're all done, that's the time to get rid of them. Okay. So much for Goddard. Now I think we're coming up to the love of my life, parachute dry fly. Ooh, get excited. I think that's what we're starting on next, aren't we? Parachutes. Oh yeah, pile of stuff. Some of this stuff, I know some of the people who've been here before will vouch to the newcomers that some of these things you're going to see next are going to be kind of neat, because, and pretty enlightening, I feel personally, not, you know, for a lot of good reasons. Parachute dry fly. Got started on these things a long time ago. Friends back in Harrisburg started talking about parachute dry flies, so I started tying them. The wings on this fly are tied out of polypropylene yarn, which doesn't waterlog. I just talked and had dinner with Mike Conley from Bozeman, who is an excellent tyer, and he comes up with a lot of good ideas. And he was saying, try the Antron wool yarn that's being sold now. Bailey sells it. I think probably Dave handles it here in the shop. And try that for the wings on not only parachutes, but spinners. And he said there's some really good colors, and he says it doesn't fray out and get fuzzy like polypropylene does after a while. So you can bet I'm going to try it. Now here's a little trick that Tim Sullivan showed me. I've got a piece of polypropylene yarn. Now you don't use the entire segment of yarn. It's generally made up for 2 or 3 plies, so you might, depending on the size of the hook and the size of the fly you're tying, take out the appropriate amount. And what I've done is taking a part of a ply here. I've laid it across the hook, much like you would tie the wings of a poly wing spinner, and I figure 8'd it. And then I taken my fingers and moved the entire wing from the top of the hook to the bottom of the hook. You notice all the nothing on top of that. This is going out the back, the other side, and this is coming out this side, but it's on the bottom of the hook. And now the next thing we're going to do is stand it up so that you have the poly yarn wrapped around the hook. There's no way you'd ever pull the wing off this fly. And then it's just a matter of doing some crisscrossing back and forth across the base and about 11 to 12 to 13 turns up to make a platform or a place to wind your hackle. You notice I've got a little crisscross in here, then I've done a little bit starting up here, and now there's a full probably 11 or 12 turns. The hackle will be wound on this part. I've used the red thread to make it a little bit more highly visible. I found something else out too that caused a little problem. This little bump down here, I take my fingernail and sort of push it out to spread these fibers out before I tie everything up nice and tight so I don't have a bump like this. Okay? Because if you do and you dub over here, sometimes that bump will show through your dubbing, and I hate to see a little, a dark brown dub body with a little white bump sticking out. This is the way I used to tie it. I used to stack this thing on top, and I used to get this big clump of stuff because poly is non-compressible, so I'd get a big, glob of this crap here, and it just didn't do a very nice job. I couldn't tie a fly smaller than size 16. Now I can. So here, now we're tying a fly for real. This is the Gulper Special. Blue done fibettes, brown tying thread, poly white wing, or various colors as you'll see. This is the dark brown dubbing. I dub up to the base of the wings, tie my hackle in. Then the next step will be to cover all of this crap in here with some more dubbing. And now we're ready to wind the hackle on. The hackle should be wound very quickly so that the second turn is right up to the top of your windings, and then you will wind back down to finish it off. And usually I like to make 6 turns of hackle around a small parachute fly. I feel that's just about the right amount.
You have one piece of hackle feather.
One hackle feather.
That's all you ever use for your parachutes?
Oh no, I tie Adam's parachute and I wind both hackles together.
Uh-huh.
But the secret to doing that is to find 2 necks that are compatible so that they'll both lay on properly when you have the hackle pliers hooked to both of them at one time.
Uh-huh.
And what I do is I'll take a neck that looks good and I'll take another neck in a grizzly that looks good and I'll try them. And if they wind real nice, I pluck those out and size the hackle and I'll tie my Adam's parachute with those. You don't have that problem when you're only tying one hackle like a light Cahill, olive done, or whatever. And again, the first 2 wraps right up to the top of your windings, and then you wind your way down. But as you come around the side, every time you bring your hackle pliers around the side, you dip them so that turn is going to be under the bunch that's laying there now. If you wind improperly, you'll start to bend fibers out underneath and everything else. But if you keep, every time you come around the side, you dip your hackle pliers and lift those up so that you're always laying the new wrap on the lowermost level. Okay? You'll see when I do it. And wind yourself right on down. To tie it off, don't be afraid to grab everything and pull out of the way. And trim this stuff off. Make a few windings while you're holding it back. Wind this thing off to get a nice looking head and do your whip finishing. And make sure you put a drop of varnish at the base of the windings if you're using any kind of a poly or any kind of synthetic fabric, because most of the synthetic yarns are slippery. And if you don't, you'll catch 1 or 2 fish and your hackle will slide off the wing. So a drop there is really, really necessary. And I trim across the top and I'll make a little angle cut down each side and flare it out, and I get a nice looking parachute wing. Now, this is a side, there's a loose hair. I'm going to have to shoot this over and pull that hair off there. I don't know where that came from. But this is a number 24 parachute. And it's on top of one of those paper matchsticks, super glued on there. But just to show you that with this new technique, instead of tying it like I used to, with Tim Sullivan's new technique and mine put together, you can tie any size you want. From underneath the water, you have, this is shot looking up, and this thing's laying in a surface film. This, instead of representing legs like most people think hackle does, again, I think it probably represents wings of a spent fly. Here's a mayfly laying with the wings outstretched, just freshly emerged. Look at the tails. See how they're curved? The more times I photograph mayflies laying on the water, their tails are always curled up in funny little things, and we're so fussy about getting them straight and separated and everything else, you know.
Don't
And those
take
are
that thread
those
off.
are the puppies that are going to get off the water real fast, and the trout aren't even going to get a chance at them. The ones that are in great shape. The ones that are like this is what the trout are looking for, because they're trapped in a surface film, and the trout knows right away that that sucker isn't going to fly away right away. Don't forget, this is his job. He's down there eating thousands of these things every day of the hatch, and they get to know what's easy and what's hard, and they're looking for probably, you know, some sort of a form or silhouette. And when they see this, you know, it's meat and potatoes time. Now here's one with the wings, you know, upright and just a couple legs down on the water. And by the way, most insects, when I photograph them, I have a hard time finding one that has all 6 legs, all 3 tails, and everything just right. Most of them, someplace along the line, have lost a leg, they've lost part of the tail, and trying to find a perfect specimen to photograph is a nightmare sometimes. In fact, when I started off with my mayfly nymphs, one of the ones I had with a green and yellow leaf and that big heptagonia sitting on it, if you would have looked real carefully, and I'd have pointed out, one of the tails was broken and bent, and it wasn't through any fault of mine, because I'd washed him off the rock and put him into a white paper dish and looked at him and I thought, ah, and I'd gone through maybe a dozen of those puppies, and I didn't find one perfectly. So sometimes, you know, we get a little fussy, and if our flies aren't perfectly nice, we worry about it. This is one of our favorite patterns, pale yellow. This is a cream hackle dyed olive, cream or olive barbettes, fivettes, and some chartreuse sort of a colored dubbing on the thing. Olive dun parachute, we call it. It's one of my biggest bestsellers. Some of the people called me last week and they wanted me to change it to a new odd size hook that I'm going to show you when I start tying. You know who this fella is here? It's our cameraman, and he caught that on a little 16 olive dun. That's a nice little dry fly fish. Rainy days, perfect to keep that suckers on the water. You know, they don't dry their wings real fast and try to have a good opportunity to get them. This is a scene from the bighorn, tricos, while we're on parachutes. See this big cloud of stuff? Flies. Trico flies. They're ready, they're in a mating flight, and they're ready to come down and start laying their eggs, and this is happening all through the day. Some days on rainy days, this thing will last 4 or 5 hours. This is one of the little side channels. Look at these clouds of bugs in there. Makes some of the most fantastic dry fly fishing you can imagine. This is a little trico male and sitting on a rock. Just tiny little fly. If you can see on the surface film of the water, there's just countless number of spent flies. You people sitting up close may be able to see that a little easier. Can you see all these little trico spent flies back in there? They lay there with their wings outstretched, long tails, and I think the trout take them because they're so easy to get. This is shot at water level, and these are a bunch of tricos and little pseudoploans all together during a hatch a couple of years ago in the big one during October. Again, all the little spinners floating. Now, it's no wonder the trout rise so freely to them on a bighorn and a Missouri. Those are 2 streams that have a very prolific trico hatch. The back eddies are literally scum. Now, we tie white, orange, black wings, same fly. These are parachute atoms, by the way. And I use, actually, if I was going to pick 2, I'd take the orange and the black. Under certain water conditions, and I'm going to show you pictures to prove it. Here is dark water. I have a black, orange, white wing. Notice that the orange and the white are the easiest to see, and maybe for some of you, if I wouldn't have said the black and pointed at it, you might not have seen it. Very difficult to see a black wing on dark water. But here's the glare. There's the white wing. There's the black wing. There's the orange wing. Look at that black hazy. What happens, light rays will not pass through the black wing. Thus they form a silhouette. On the other fibers, on the white, the light comes through, right through the fibers, and they sort of disappear. It lessens the contrast. So we tie anymore basically orange and black for different conditions. This is a new hook I've been using. This is a little Daiichi hook, model 1640. I just ordered 5,000 of them yesterday. Ring eye, a little bit offset bend, but a nice wide gap and a nice wire size for the size of the hook. And these are very small flies. There's a little orange wing tricos, the parachute stuck in that brown's mouth. Okay, while we're on parachutes, I'm not going to tie this, but while we're on parachute dry fly, this is an extended body. Piece of mono sticking out the back. I've already tied some black elk fibers. This is a dark green drake, by the way. And after the body has been wound on, I'm going to trim this mono and the hair all at the same time. I've tied in a wing with black polypropylene. All these elk fibers now are going to be taken back to the rear, and I'll wind through them with my tying thread, a couple 3 wraps at the tail, and back again to here. Then I'll come back and I'll cut off the mono and the excess hair. The wing is wrapped with a chartreuse colored hackle, grizzly dyed chartreuse. The wing is formed to a shape and trimmed into a shape, and it's varnished right at the very base all across there to keep it into that shape. Once you catch a fish, it's very easy to take your fingers and preen it back into shape real easily. And it gives you a great silhouette on the water, and it's been a very good fly for us. The chartreuse coloring of the grizzly is great. If you look at this is a dark green drake fly crawling up my pattern, and this is one of the old patterns. But if you look at the color of the leg right there, and look at this color here, pretty darn close, the chartreuse and the grizzly. And the little black bars from the grizzly. Using poly for spinners or spent wing flies, what I do is I crisscross and wind them on, then I put a few wraps around the base, so that I get a little better shape. And I trim them to a shape and put a little varnish here and here to keep that shape. Most of the spinners I tie are on the small size. This was a long time ago. This is a little piece of orange fluorescent yarn that's put right here for late evening spinner falls where the fly is almost impossible to see because it sits in a water film. So what we've done is taken this thing here and put some fluorescent coloring into it. Now during tricos, you're during the daytime, they're a little easier to find. Some of these cream colored flies, a little easier to see on the water. But some of these darker colored flies, the late evening spinner falls, like on the Hendrickson Hatch in eastern part of the country, this was really a necessary part. Okay, that's compare done. We'll get there and tie some parachutes first.
You don't feel it's necessary to split those tails and those parachutes out?
I sure don't. If you tie them properly and sort of, what I do is I hold my tail fibers off to an angle, and I put some wraps around, and I pull them up, and I take my fingernail even and spread them so that instead of being a clump of fibers, they open up. I do split some. I have split some, you know.
I saw something in the magazine the other day where the guy puts like 2 wraps of thread, one on top of the other, and then he puts the fibers on top, and then he wraps to it, and it sort of flares them out, but it also puts them up a little bit. In other words, they're not riding parallel to the water, they're raising up a little bit.
I do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it works. Every once in a while, if the mood strikes me, I split them. If it doesn't, I
It
don't.
doesn't seem to make any difference on floating.
No, and one's easier to tie than the other.
Yeah, I know.
So, you know, unless you're looking for work.
No, that's what I think I sometimes do.
The parachutes are just super flies. In fact, anymore, I would say that an elk ear caddis, a parachute, and a compare done, and if we can't catch them on that, we're not going to catch them.
You said that was the 1640 ring-eye Daiichi.
Mm-hmm. Right.
He's got some here, Dave.
He does?
Yeah, we have other.
In fact, I'm going to tie a comparadon on one of those hooks so that you'll see it. This is a size 14. I'm tying some of this stuff big enough so that
It's a 1X short.
You can
ring
see,
eye hook,
really.
And it's the same. It's a Daiichi.
here, I'm going to tie an orange wing on this one here. We'll get some colors that are a little easier to see for a while. This is poly yarn. And like I say, I'm going to have to try what Mike was telling me because he plays around a lot and he finds a lot of things out. And it's kind of funny. We ate dinner today and we were talking about different things, and he suggested one way of doing something, and it start the juices flowing, and boy, just one thing leads to another. You know how it is. Like when you're trying to think of a joke to tell somebody and you can't, and somebody tells a joke and another guy tells a joke, and before you know it, you have 100 jokes and you can't wait till it's your turn. So. Now, this thing, very lightly, first couple turns, 2 figure-8s and a turn around here, and that's on top of the hook. Now, if you just take this whole mess and put it under the hook, simple so far, everybody going with me, and then stand this up, it's wrapped around the hook. Now, I'm going to put a little heavier wing on this. Let me take this off. I'm going to put 2-ply on there because this is a bigger hook than I normally tie, and I usually, on a 16, I put 1-ply. This is 3-ply poly that I have. But on this particular 14 hook that I'm tying on, I think they give you a better idea of the amount of material for. Okay, here we go. Now, first couple turns, I sort of, just like you saw me with my hands, and a couple figure-8s, and this is where I was telling you where I like to push that little ball to sort of flatten it out a little bit, so that I don't have a big ball or a hump there, and my dubbing will wind over a little nicer. And usually about 11 or so wraps on that thing for one hackle will be fine. This is a blue dun dyed 5-et. You can use white and most any of the lighter colors I think would work fine. I want the tails just a little hair longer on this, not too long, but And this is what I was telling you. I put these fibers on, and I spin them, and I'll pull them apart a little bit so that they're separated. I'll put a shot of varnish on that, and usually the varnish will keep them in that position, so there's not much of a problem. Okay, for dubbing, varnish. I'm kind of anxious to see some of Rocky Mountain Dubbing's muskrat. I was the one that told him to do it, and I'm the only one that I've talked to so far that has the stuff that doesn't have the stuff, and I was the guy that prompted him into doing it.
How long ago was that?
Last year,
Oh,
last
year.
fall in December. He wanted to do beaver, and I said, "Oh, beaver's no good. Beaver gets real kinky. It's got little waves in it or something, and what happens to it? If you throw it in a blender, you can't separate it real nice because the little kinky things seem to stick together, and they don't do a very nice job." And that's what I was telling him. I said, "Oh, no, go muskrat. And that's what I told him. I said, get 25 skins and bleach them out and dye a couple colors when you do them and send them down to me and bill me for them." Never heard from him. He called me up every once in a while. He's never mentioned it. Of course, if you know Steve Knert, he goes in 3 directions at one time. He's a hell of a nice guy, but he sometimes forget what he's doing right at the moment. Let me see what I did. Okay, here we go. Now I'll put a little dubbing on the front part of that.
Did you use a standard size hackle, or do you go larger or smaller, or what on these positions?
We like a little smaller. I sort of do the same thing I do with an elk hair caddis. If I'm tying a 14, this is a 14 hook, and this should be a 15 hackle on here. And I just go the way I think, one size, okay? I think a lot of times, most of the parachutes you'll see in the stores, as they use them to get rid of their old feathers or something, because they've got them so big that it gets ridiculous. And most of the life forms that we don't have very many big mayflies out here in the West like you do in the East. We have mayflies that would just, shock you out of your boot. We have a green drake pattern. Now this is where I was telling you, if you leave this bump in here too much, the orange ball or white ball, whatever color you use, will show through. Now,
Saying in the East they have huge mayflies?
oh yeah,
Oh, yeah?
yeah. There's a fly in the Midwest called the Hexagenia limbata.
Oh yeah, I fished
and
that
then-
one in Wisconsin.
yeah,
Yeah,
right.
That's huge.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. And then the Ephemera gutulata in Pennsylvania, the green drake.
Hummingbird one.
Yeah, they are tremendously big. Well, I have a hard time finding
Hackle
stuff.
pliers?
Hackle pliers, yeah.
They're behind your glasses there.
That's what I mean. That kind of gets impossible to find some of that stuff. Okay, when you wrap this hackle, the first couple passes, I'm going to go up pretty quick to the top. And then I'll come down in the middle, and then from now on, I'm going to go down under so I don't wind hackles under. When I come around this side, I'll go down again, okay? This was kind of hard to explain verbally for me before, but I think now that you see what I'm doing, it may make a little bit more sense, okay? So that I don't tie and have a lot of hackles hanging where I don't want them. And this is why you wear a towel in your lap. Somebody said that one day when I was tying. Somebody said, I always do that. And I said, what's that? And they said, cut the tying thread. I didn't cut the tying thread. I said, I just, I cut my hackle pliers loose. And I said, well, we do that too. And fall. No, it didn't fall on the floor. There they are. But,
Do you wrap that hackle outside of the feather up or outside of the feather down?
mm-hmm.
Question. Which way? Sunny side up or sunny side down?
The curve side down. Concave down. Now then I pull this up, and then a lot of people, I don't know why they don't take the time to do this. If you just take your fingers, you can distribute those hackles. When you first tie them, they don't look real nice, but if you take the time and just sort of do a little bit of preening, and here's where that drop of varnish goes, right at the base of that wing. If you don't do that, the fly will disintegrate for you pretty shortly after a fish or two. And okay. Now the only thing we have to do is cut the wing off and we're all set. My scissors are getting dull. I have a brand new pair back home of these things. These are those carbide laced ones with a little block in, and they have seen better days. That's the gulper, orange wing, great fly, good parachute pattern. Like I say, I'm kind of spoiled. We catch so many fish on parachutes. And, you have to sort of go with what wins the game. Okay. Now let's see where we're down here on this big bust in the sky. Compare done. Okay. I think what I'll do is I'll tie this thing, and then I'll show the slides on it, and I'll get into the next salmon, hopper type of thing. This is calf hair, and what I'm going to tie is a blue wing olive, and these are some of the hooks. Let me see, I'm going to take a piece of that foam, and I'm going to put one of these hooks on, and I'll pass that around while I'm getting it set up here, and you can take a peek at this hook if you haven't seen it. This is a size, I call them 15. They're not really truly 15s, but I'll tell you what. The shank of the hook in length is a size 15. Daiichi calls it a 16, but it's not the true length of a 16, okay? So, I call them odd sizes so that my customers don't get them fouled up with something else. I always tell them, and I'll tell you how impressive some people are about this new hook. This is a 1640, size 16, I call 15. Nick Lyons talked to some people, and I sent him some of these a couple years ago and last year, and he's been buying all these flies tied on this particular hook. And two guys called last week and said, can you change our order around? I said, why? And they said, well, we talked to Nick Lyons, and he's all excited about some hook you got. And I said, which one? They said, oh, I knew which one, but I played the game with them. I said, which one? They said, oh, that's size 17. Make all my flies size 17, okay? I said, okay. So 2 orders I changed this last week and make everything size 17. It's a lovely hook. It does the job. Okay, this is Blue Dun dyed calf elk. Knert dyed this stuff, and I bought a hide. And in fact, I went down and he had a wet hide. And I saw this Blue Dun shade, and this isn't it. And I said, Jesus, I didn't even know you could dye that Blue Dun. I said, that's perfect. I said, that's what I've been after all my life. He said, oh yeah, nothing to that, nothing to that. So I picked out a real good elk hide. And he had a couple scraps of this stuff laying on the floor. I said, I'm going to take this with me. So I did. And he said, I'll dye it. So he took a mark, put it on my hide, and he dyed it. And I said, I'm not real crazy about that purple you call Blue Dun. Well, there it is. I got the hide. And I said, what the hell happened? I said, you told me you could do that, you know, with like a... And I said, well, I'll tell you what. I sent him another sample. I said, nail this sample to your wall. And I said, if you ever dye a good calf skin this color, send it to me. Don't even ask, just send it to me. But he had, you know, I've got some scraps home. It's a perfect color. I don't know how to explain it. It's the color of a sky just before a rainstorm. That color gray. Not real dark, you know, not real light. I don't mean that real dark gray, but just a perfect dun color. I mean, you know, you could tie a wing on a compared dun so close to the natural that it would make the natural blush. That kind of color, that close. And I just couldn't believe that, you know, he messed the color up that bad. But what are you going to do? Okay, I've got fibettes for the tail. I've got some dubbing. By the way, I remember I was telling you I take my Spectrum dubbing and cut it up into little chunks. If you try to pull stuff off of this, it doesn't work real nice. But if you break it in two like this and put the two halves you broke together and get the clumps out, I don't know if you can see with the light coming behind it. You see how fuzzy that is? You can tease out just a nicest little amount to make very nice, finely tapered bodies. But every fly you have to break it apart again and use that section in the center, because it's a little trick that, you know, for Spectrum users, it really makes a difference. Okay, let me get my light in the right place for the camera there. I tie my wings on first, just habit. There's no special way to do it. A lot of times if you stack something and they don't stack real nice, what the problem can be is sometimes the hairs are too long and they got a little curve to them. So what I would do in that case is I would trim them a little shorter so that when you put them in this little stacker, there's not as much friction and they'll slide down a little nice and they'll even up a little easier. Again, the wings, we're going to go, I feel like it's too much here, okay. I'm going to tie the wings about the length of the hook. If you remember when I was telling you something at the beginning, that female are bigger than the males. So that if you tie one with bigger wings on and someone looks at your flies and said, you screwed up, you got the wings too big, you say, that's a female. Sure. Okay, this other little tool here is a handy little gadget also. You can pull these wings up. On a bigger fly, you can pull them up pretty easy, but the hair to get it up in a top position. But on a smaller stuff, it's more difficult, but you can take this little device here, and it'll push those hair fibers up on a little compare gun so that you can get them, you know, up right where you want them. On the bigger patterns, that doesn't present itself as much of a problem, but on these little ones. And enough hair or winds right in front of that thing to get it to stand up. And again, you're going to have some wild hairs, and the only thing you can do is just cut them out of there. They're not going to cause you much of a problem. Put a little bit of varnish at the base of that. I'm going to have to do something. Well, it's too late to do something about it now. The varnish is getting really kind of thick. Don't worry about that 180-degree spreading of that thing until you're almost finished. Wings go on first. The fivettes, if you're hell-bent on separating tail fibers, I'll show you a trick while we're doing this here. I normally just roll them on, but I'll show you a little trick that works pretty good. You remember when I was talking about a halter for the coil wings? Okay, same difference. Here, if you take and split these wings, or the tail rather, into two even bunches. I miss my background. When I'm tying at home, if I didn't have it in background, I don't think I could tie. I'm tying and I'm trying to look at this against the wood. If I had my blue background right that close, I could see it real easy. But as it is, it makes it kind of difficult. Okay, I've separated that little pow, and all I have to do is slip this thread in here, put it together, and spin it, and pull it forward, and wind over top, trim off the excess, first part of the excess, okay? And now, when I pass this around, you'll see I'm going to have a beautiful set of forked tails, and I think it's a lot faster and easier to do than some of the stuff I've read. In fact, John Betts, maybe you've read some of his stuff or not, he ties the flies out of synthetic materials. John and I are good friends. And he had written an article, The Hockley Method of Tailing.
Yeah.
Did you read that?
I read that quite a while ago.
And he had a page and a half, no pictures, of trying to tell you how to do what I just did there. So I took a picture with fluorescent red thread and split the tails like that. I didn't say a thing, and I dropped it in an envelope and just mailed it to him. And I got a letter back from him with nothing in it except a 3 or 5 card in big red letters that said, "Go to hell." But he was just kidding. He was saying that, he says, God, he says, I guess there's always easier ways. I said, yeah. I said, somebody's always showing me something. I said, that was a technique used by this Englishman, 1917. He couldn't believe it. I said, yeah. I said, I'll take a copy of that thing. I don't think the guy is around to enforce his copyright infringements, but I said, I'll send you a copy of it someday. I said, he called it a halter. I'm getting clumps out of here. There we go. This is the trouble with Spectrum. And I've chopped this up and put it in a blender. And hopefully by next year I'm going to be tying out a muskrat so that this dubbing problem isn't going to be a problem. It shouldn't be. But I find the synthetics are harder to work with. Harder than what I want them to be. This is going to be a female Baetis. They're approximately this size. I need more dubbing on there. I wrap the dubbing, as you'll see when I pass this around, on the front and the back of the wing. It's to support them in a position that I want them to stay in. I've come right up to the back end of that, and I've got a nice taper on that, so I'll pull the whole wing forward. I'll make a wrap closer to where the eye is going to be, then I'll wrap backwards so I get a base in front of the wing, okay? And then one wrap behind, and then another wrap in front, and that's it. And it just makes a gorgeous little compare gun, I think. And this hook adds something to the fly. like I said, I just bought 5,000 of these hooks yesterday. I fell in love. I got about 5,000 or 6,000 home, but I thought, True Blood said one time, he said, if you find something you like, buy a lifetime supply because they're going to quit making it. And I go by that rule. Okay, I put a little varnish, not past that. But you'll see that these split tails are kind of neat that way. And let's see here. Here, I'll just stick it right on the same one with a thingy-my-bobby here. Okay. If you can't catch them on a little parachute, go to a comparadon. If you can't catch them then, something's wrong with your presentation probably. But I have just the utmost faith in that pattern. I just sent some samples and flies and a couple little things I wrote up to. There's two Italians from back in the East that came up with that thing, Casci and Nastasi or whatever it is. And I told them how much I like their patterns. And I showed them my interpretation of what they were doing. Okay, here that goes there too. Okay, I think we're on a McSalmon, McHopper thing, and some of these things are going to be more or less, yeah, we're doing good. Okay. Well, what time for? Well, we're going to go a little bit over if you want to stay. I'll finish off the rest of this stuff here. Okay, McHopper. Okay.
I think most of us will stay till 10 o'clock at night, but you will.
Yeah, my wife will tell you that's the way I am.
Again,
Comparadon.
just a sec.
There's calf hair. This is that little ring eye hook I just passed around. And the wings tied in, pointing over the front, the length that you want them. You can use a ballpoint pen empty to push them up, or that little, this is a half-inch tool that I'm using here. Either one will do the job, or push them up and shake them. You can grab them once they're up there with your fingers. And enough winds in front of that, make them stand up. Back to the tail. This, I'm using that little halter to split those tail fibers, like I showed you when I did this from here. And you'll take a look at that Betis when I turn the lights back on, passed around, and that's how the wings or the tail fibers were split. This is a little better demonstration of it. This shows you from the side, and there should be a top view in here also. Yeah, there it is from the top. And when you come up, you can make three tails this way even. You can run a thread between the middle one and the other, and if you want a little bit more bulk, you can put 6 or 8 fivettes and divide them into 4 and 4 on each side. Not necessarily relegated to just one. You can use any number you want to get the density or the flotation that you want. Now, this is some Antron wool sticking out of the back, and I've taken some red thread and I made a double overhand knot. You know, on an overhand knot you go through once. I went through twice over the thing, and I'm going to pull it up tight and slide it down, and what that's going to be is I leave that little knot on there and I varnish it right there to give you a stillborn shuck. I like to have the shucks taper to a point. I don't know if it makes any difference. Probably doesn't. A lot of people just take and snip them off and they have hairs going all over. And I think it looks more like a shuck or a body this way than it does if you have these things all square cut on the end. I do all of mine that way. I like them that way. And then the finished dubbing, this would be a little Dorothea pattern for back in Pennsylvania or Maryland or somewhere in that area. The front, I take my fingers after I've tied and finished the fly, and with my fingers I distribute the fibers to form that 180 degrees. I've already put a good dollop of varnish in the front and the back of the base, so that when that thing sets up, that's where they're going to stay. That's one of the nice things about varnish. It takes a long time to dry, but it gives you a lot of time to work. This is a little pseudoclone, a tiny little fly. You can tell by the size of it on my fingernail, and a lot of people call it a little Betis. and it comes off sometimes with betas and with the tricos. It was on October the 15th, 2 years ago we were on the Bighorn, and it was off in tremendous numbers. How big is it? There's a trico, there's a pseudoclaw. You know how big the trico is. Look at the size of the pseudoclaw compared to the trico. Quite a bit of difference. We need a new tray. What are we doing on those trays? We should be on about number 5. Huh? Yeah, good. Okay, we're going to start on grass.
Well, on those compare guns, what about using orange wings on those as well, and black ones?
Black would be good. Black wouldn't hurt at all. In fact, black hair would be great because the hair it's opaque instead of translucent. And it wouldn't let any light go in. That worked real fine. A lot of times, I have tied some of my betas for the Bighorn with black. I have some black calf on. I bought a half a black calf skin. And I've been using that, for my own personal use. I have a hard time introducing new ideas and new flies to clients. I mean, when you know certain things and you buy a lot of stuff and you're used to catching fish on them, it's only when they have real problems they get on some of the spring creeks. Or I'll send them a complimentary bunch of flies and say, here, try these when you fish the Betas hatch on the Bighorn. And then they come back and order it special. And after enough years, it seems like enough people find out, then I don't have to push it anymore. It's like a matter of fact, okay? So, yeah, I think, black is one of my favorites for visibility, the glassy waters, smooth waters. In fact, I carry a black Marks-a-Lot felt tip marker pen. And a lot of times when I'm fishing, I'll take a fly if I can't see it and just blacken the top of the fly. I won't even bother with the bottom, just the top part so I can see it under the glaring water. The only trouble with that is when you put fly dope on, the black dye doesn't adhere to the feather or thing. So a lot of times I have to keep changing fly, and I've got enough flies usually I can put a new one on. But like on Griffith gnats one day, I blackened all the hackle on top of the Griffith gnat. And it worked great. I couldn't see the darn thing. I had them in size 22s, and I couldn't see them out there real good. And as soon as I did that, it was bang, automatic. So. Hoppers. Grasshoppers are a funny type of thing. Somebody will say, oh, I was fishing the Bighorn when the hopper year was real good. And I had a client, met me there, and he said, what are we going to use? I said, here, put this hopper on, John. And he said, I haven't seen any trout eating hoppers. I said, well, they're eating them. I said, you're not watching all the time. And he said, I haven't seen them. I said, well, wait a minute. And I rowed the boat over by the shore and threw the anchor out, and I got 7 hoppers. Give them to John. I said, I rowed back out and got in the drift line. I said, throw those hoppers out. And he threw them out, and every hopper was eaten by a fish. All 7 of them disappeared in fish. So he turned around and said, give me a hopper. Well, but yeah, and something about these hoppers here. Look at the wing length on this one. Shorter than the body, okay? Look at the wings on this one, longer than the body. Same length as the body. Look at the colors, look at the sizes. There's so many different kinds of hoppers out there. I don't think you have to get too uptight when you start selecting hopper patterns. From underneath the water, what triggers them? Big long body has to be number 1. Big legs, number 2. Then these 4 legs here would be probably 3rd, and the antenna maybe, Antennas are such a pain to tie on hoppers, I don't even bother. Here's my mech hopper. Big long body. Big legs coming out, number 2. Little legs coming out the side, number 3. I left the antennae off. Okay? This is what I think's really, look at the wings. You can barely see that little thing. That's what that is. That's the pair of wings coming up in the back, and they come together. Doesn't make much difference to the fish, really. But I kind of think this silhouette, you compare that now to that silhouette, and you have pretty much the same thing. You notice there's hardly any translucency at all. The only color you get is just a little bit maybe from the directional lighting here. So color, not that important on hoppers. You don't have to worry about translucence. In fact, opaque materials might be a little bit better. Okay. Here's a brown trout that ate one of our McHoppers. In fact, I think Eric caught this fish. I think that was the first fish he caught on a McHopper. We were on a bighorn coming down, and he said, "Let me try one of those." And he threw it out in the water, and a trout come up behind it. And I said, "Jiggle your rod tip. Don't jerk the fly. Just jiggle your rod tip and make little rings come out of the fly." Went like that, and boom, there he was. He was on it. So, you know, it's worked real well for us. To make the McHopper, we're using a stuff called macrame. We're tying a couple flies out of this. 1984, somebody introduced me to macrame. Mike Conley suggested cutting this. I used to cut it with scissors. Mike says, try a razor blade. It works better. And it does. A lighter to fuse the ends. Razor blade to cut it. Super glue to fasten it to the hook. I put a thread base underneath. And what I've been doing lately is I've been putting a coating of super glue on here, letting it dry. Then I thread my piece of macrame on, bind it down. I've done something new because you know what tie-dyeing is? Where you wind a rope or something around some material and you dye it, and right where the rope was you don't get any dye. Same thing was happening with the glue, so when I started wrapping the thread, I'd put like 3 wraps, leave a space and put 3 or 4 wraps back here to come back, and then finish it off. And when I put the super glue on, it was readily absorbed in the open space between the 2 wrappings of thread. I wasn't giving that tie-dye thing. I found out that I wasn't doing a good job super gluing it until I finally did it that way. So these things here, rather than change them, I think it's, you know, more impressive if I can show you what I did wrong and what I'm doing now. Rubber comes in those strips that are 40 pieces on a thing, and you break off 3, tie an overhand knot, pluck it out, throw 2 strands away so you have the big heavy part of the leg and the lighter part of the leg. I use a wing on a fly sheet. This is yellow hair tied on for visibility. Rubber legs tied onto the sides. The head, you notice the way the legs are angled also. You don't work this thing like you were pulling in a jitterbug, bass bug or something like that. You just sort of shake your rod tip and those legs will twitch a little bit. Throw a hopper in the water sometime and watch him. They'll lay there motionless and their legs will go twitch, twitch. And then nothing. And maybe twitch, nothing. And if you fish your fly that way, it looks more natural. And this is what the fish are used to seeing. I'm sure a lot of times that a hopper will drift down through a heavy piece of current and a trout will pass it by and not see it until its legs go twitch, twitch. They've got it. There's this bit about the deer hair for flaring again. Tying it down, cutting this so that when we spin this around, there you've got these short hairs. It makes it easier to trim. On my McHopper, I add 1 bunch of hair to the front of that, and I stack the top one on so that I have an overhang on the top part. I trim it to a shape, put a lot of varnish in here and in the top of the hair, so they end up with this side of look. I like a lot of varnish in here for a reason. That taper on the front end, when you pick your cast up off the water, it allows the fly to slide up off the surface. Even if it's submerged, you know, like halfway down, it'll slide up off there and you can pick it up real easy. If you put a chugger type head on, a square head, and you try to pick it up, a lot of times it'll go underwater and you'll have a hard time making a back cast. So the reason that little taper was put on there was to facilitate lifting the fly off the water. There's a trout that just sort of took a little splash, little explosion out there. Threw it right in the middle of an August day. It was like 107 degrees in a shade, and we were out in the middle of the day, and the guy had a hangover, and he said, "What are we going to fish with?" And I give him a number 6 hopper, and he said, "Oh, come on." I said, "Yep." And we're coming down, and he said, "I don't see any fish eating hot." Another disbeliever, you know. And finally I said, "Well, tell you what, fish for half an hour, and if you don't catch a fish, you can try anything you want." So it wasn't long, that fish, and there's the first trout he caught. It was 4 pounds, 15 ounces, big old male brown, and he just couldn't wait to get out there. you know, his little blood vessels in the eye from the hungover eyes sort of disappeared, and he was just hot to catch fish. And we got off the river. We come in. That was it. Were you there that time we got off? We come into 13 Mile. What time? I think it was 12:30 or 1 in the morning or something. Yeah. Okay. While we're on McHopper, same technique. The McSalmon flies, big Pteronarcis stoneflies crawling up a trunk. You'll see them long thing. If you look in the willows around the streams, you'll find the big ones are the females, the little ones are the males. This pair caught in the act. The stages: the adult nymph, a partially emerged nymph, adult fly. Only one stage in the adult form. The nymphs, some of them vary in coloration. Here's one with a pattern on the color. Some of them are very dark. Under the thorax, there's the orange I was telling you about. See these little tufts? Respiratory filaments. This is how you can tell a stonefly nymph from a mayfly nymph very easily. All of the gill apparatus on a mayfly are located on the abdomen. On a stonefly, they're all on the thorax. When we say all and never, that makes it pretty easy. From under the water, again, what patterns do we see? Here, we got a big body silhouette first. Wings and legs, maybe tied for second. Antenna, I don't like to tie antennas on. They're a real pain in the neck. Generally, you tie your fly on, you get the antenna stuck in your knot, and you cut it off anyway. So, how do they sit in the water? Here's water level view. They hang where the wings are big and flat, and they get caught in the surface tension of the water and support the fly right in a surface film. The body hangs underneath. Females, black egg sac clusters. The emergence, not too important because the nymphs are crawling up again on logs, rocks, ridge abutments, and they hatch, fly into the willows, mate, and the time you get them is during the mating flights, and it may vary a little bit, but a lot of it happens mid-afternoon. Here's our McSalmon fly next to one of the naturals. Doesn't look a whole lot like, but when you start looking at silhouette, it does. We've been putting a cut wing underneath here so that it more represents a spent fly. Notice how that wing just gives that spent fly. Now, for the head, there's a couple ways you can finish these things. You can do this, you can put a clipped hair in, which is clipped head, deer hair head, which is really tough, lasts a long time, and or you can take and make a bullet head with the same fly. Make a bullet head and put some black rubber on for legs. Now we have the big body silhouette, we got the wings, and we've added legs on the antenna we don't talk about. A typical day. Makes sense. Lots of deer hair in my lap and on the floor, under my arms, everywhere. You'll find cases of stonefly nymphs all along the shoreline, different types. There are some big stoneflies. This is an Acronuria type, gray, big yellow. This is on a 5mm grid, quite big and large. Trout seem to like these big yellow and blackish, tannish colored flies. And notice again, antenna broken off. There's always something. Some of the fly patterns of old were used. This was back in the early 60s. My big stonefly called the Terrible Troth, guy from Knoxville, Tennessee, named it. This is an Olson Helgramite. And this is a Sufel nymph, and what we call the lead pipe. Everything you see underneath here is lead wire. One wrap solid and a double wrap up to here. Big piece of lead. I mean, you took your life in your hands casting it. This was the old sofa pillow, and it's still in use, bird stonefly. And I came up with my salmon fly pattern in the 60s, and it's a little different type of construction, but we've gone pretty much to the McSalmon now. We find that that's a real super pattern. And this is a big old brown trout that took a dry salmon fly. Another pattern we have is, for a salmon fly, is tied out a long rump hair that's dyed tangerine colored. It's got some black elk hair tied out the back to represent the tail. The wing is elk hair, with a topping of fluorescent orange. Remember I was showing you how the natural sits so low in the water, or the natural. The artificial should sit the same way, and when it does, it makes it very difficult to see. But with this fluorescent piece in here, it really helps. This is a big fly now. That's a number 4 hook usually, and you get that much fluorescent color, and you can see it pretty easy usually, especially when you're fishing out of a boat and you're standing up in front of a driftboat. This is a bullet head maker, Fausting. It's just a piece of rubber glued into a piece of plastic. To make a bullet head, you stack your hair and right up against the eye of the hook, just like you were going to spin a collar. But remember those pieces you left big enough so they were about the diameter of the head you wanted to make? You cut them down pretty small. You spin this around, take your tying thread back, take this tool, slide it over the top, and it pushes all the hair back, and you let it hang on there. And when you end up, you've got a bullet head. I just put it on a bare hook to show you the basic principles without a lot of other stuff confusing it. This is our finished fly. You can use a black or a brown head on the material. That's a bullet head. We tie a grasshopper with this same technique that the last fly was tied with. A bunch of elk hair tied in here, segment it with wrappings, down to about part of the bend of the hook, come back one segment, make a half hitch in here. All this hair then will be pulled forward, and then you'll come back up and segment it again. And I take a pair of pliers, my flat jaw, those are the ones I left home, and you squeeze this crazy thing flat. And what it does, it takes that round shape of the hair and makes it this way. And what it does, more surface tension on the water. You got a bigger, flatter area, makes it float a little bit better. I add on a pair of goose bite. You can use red or gold for the wings. Some coastal deer hair on small sizes tied on, and a little wing. Wings aren't that important, but I like to see them on there just so you know they're there. I mean, the fish can't see them, they're up on top, and you saw when I showed that picture of the hopper underwater, they don't see those wings anyway, so we don't get all bent out of shape about that. Nice, easy pattern. And with the same technique, only different colors. My hair cricket. Real simple. Same exactly as that last fly, tied the same way, only everything is black. We found that a couple times the crickets on the bighorn, we hit them a couple years that the crickets were really important. And we did drill with them in the middle of the day. Little letoured hopper, the wing is a clipped hair, dub body, and this is that fly sheet again. And this is a little, I think this was a little number 16 to show you. And the hair on here was coastal deer hair. You notice the color, black, tan, and this is a very short little piece. This would only be probably a 1/4 of an inch long. Okay, that's on to something else. Let me see, Eve is up. Hoppers, fire. Some of those I'm just going to go through. That's good. Okay, good. I'm going to.
Oh, too fast.
I have some of these partially tied, so I'll save a little bit of time on some of this stuff.
Have you seen the way that Mike Conley cuts his heads on the coppers and the
Yeah,
salmon with the
with a razor blade. You know what I'm afraid of? Getting a nasty cut someday.
He says he's never cut himself. He says he doesn't cut himself doing that. I tried it. I was scared to death. I was sweating so bad I had to take a shower when I was done bending that razor blade around. But I didn't cut myself.
This is 3 strands put together. You pull it up tight, and what you do is you trim these to shape. I'm just going to put a head on one so somebody can have one, and then you can pluck these things. And I generally try to get them so that I have a left and right leg when I tie. Sometimes these knots, I don't know if you've tied these or tried this or not, sometimes the knots, if they're not properly tied, you don't get there. Oh, there we go, perfect. Okay. I have a little card that I lay these things on, and I cut, one of them is 13 millimeters for a size 8, and the other one, the big end, is size 17 millimeters. So, you know, And then when you pluck these things, they open up. Okay. And then I cut off the two that don't match. Now here would be a right hand leg. Now you tie an overhand knot one way. If you tie it just the opposite, the leg will cock the other way. So much for that thing here. Let me see if I can get one partially tied. I brought some plastic boxes with.
There's a couple of.
Oh, there they are. Okay. Okay. I'll put a head on this thing here. This is one of the bullet heads. And this is a McSalmon. And this is that segmented salmon fly.
We were talking right after lunch that we were looking at these actually. The bullet heads aren't quite as durable.
No, but you know what you can do with them? You can coat them with Flexamine. And they're pretty tough. And last year, I fished more with a bullet head, just to find out some things about it. And the rubber legs and the bullet head, and it worked pretty good.
The little yellow segmented hopper's a good fly. I've had good luck with that.
Have you?
Yeah.
Yeah, we did. You know what? That makes a good little stonefly for like the big hole or the Yellowstone, really.
Salmon are what we were using last year over on the big hole when my dad caught his first fish on a fly.
It's pretty exciting.
It is. That was my Father's Day present to him on Father's Day. When over there. God, we had fun.
What a good kid, huh?
That was. God, I thought it was probably the nicest thing I'd ever done. He'd been taking me for years, but we'd been spin fishing and stuff like that, so it was my turn to take him fly fishing.
Oh,
What did he think of it? Was he hooked? Yeah. Not
He
sure.
enjoyed it, but he's getting to the age and body temperament that he'd probably do it again with me, but it's not something that he is dyed in the wool on. But I got photos of him and everything.
Well, you know,
Failed as a son,
a
huh?
lot of times, if
I got him into fish.
if you go out and have a very good day, it can really change the way you look at things. Because I've had people that weren't real hepped up about fly fishing. They go out and they really do a super job and get into some good fish, and all of a sudden, I had a client last year. I don't know. My name was mentioned, Field and Stream, as a guide. So he called me up and he says, "Hi, this is George so and so from California." He says, "Saw your name in Field and Stream. I'd like to fish with you." I said, "Okay." I said, "What do you spin or fly?" He says, "Neither." And what do you mean neither? I said, "I've never fished in my life." He says. I said, "What?" He said, "I never fished in my life." And I said, "Well, I'll tell you what." I said, "You come over to the house and I have a fly rod set up, and I'll teach you how to cast. And if you can cast 20 feet, I'll take you fishing." 20 feet. I said, "That's all we need to catch trout." He says, "Fair enough." So he came over to the house and I showed him how, and he grabbed the rod and 20 feet of line. He did it. I said, "Get in the truck, we'll go." Ended up, he caught 14 fish for me. Or he hooked 14 fish. He landed, I think, 8 or something like that. But he did. I have his picture with a 21-inch brown and a 19-inch brown, and he was just tickled to death. And I got a letter from him this year, and I'm going to stack this front bunch of hair, just not letting it spin around. Just on my hopper. And he says, "We want to come and fish with you 3 days." He's hooked. He's hooked. And you know what? In the evening, we started off nymph fishing, and he broke off a couple big fish. I was telling him to keep his rod tip up high to cushion the leader, and he didn't. And he hooked a fish that we caught a few days later that turned out to be, it was a 4-pound, 6-ounce fish. One of my good fishing clients caught it, and we weighed it and took a picture of it, vacuum. But he hooked that fish and broke it off. It was in the same place. I'm sure the same fish. And he broke that off, but he dropped his rod tip and almost pointed at the fish, and his wife was kidding him, and I was kidding him. "What'd you do? Forget?" "Oh, yeah." I got excited. But after that, you know, we were hollering, and we knew he was going to forget, so we kept hollering, hold that rod up, hold the rod up. And every once in a while he'd forget, and he'd break one off. But he did a real good job. But he did catch a couple nice big trout on dry fly, 16 elk here caddis. And oh, you know, that was, he had come to heaven, and this was it. So, you know, he wanted me to tell him what kind of rod and reel and everything to buy. So
He's hooked.
he's hooked. And sometimes that's all it takes, you know, one good day. And when we fish, we take our time and we hunt fish. We don't, you know, we don't spend that much time casting blind anymore, because I find most of our clients aren't that adept at casting so that they can throw the fly where you say it when you want. If you take the time and show them a fish and give them a little bit of time, 9 out of 10 times they hook the fish for us, and that's what we're all about. So, razor blades, they cut so fast, you have to be very careful. I don't know how fast, I'd like to time Mike when he cuts his with a razor blade to see. I know basically how long it takes me to do clipped hair heads, but one of the things I don't like about that razor blade, if you're off a 32nd of an inch, it's noticeable. If I'm off doing it by eye like I'm doing it here, you don't notice it at all. I can make little mistakes, and they don't show up. But on that thing, it's so precise. Everything, the results are so precise. And like I say, I'm always deathly afraid. You know, when you're a fly tire, boy, you mess that thing up and your fingers up and you're in big trouble.
Yeah.
I
And he's
know.
done it I saw him do it at a TU meeting.
You know,
He's
I've
good.
done a few of them myself, you know, and like I say, I didn't like the results, and I kind of, you know, I like the hand hewn look. It got too mechanical looking, so I decided that, you know, not the way that I wanted to do it.
Well, we can go out in the other
But
room
they
and
look
pick
pretty.
about 24 up of his cut that way and see how they look.
Oh,
We got a
yeah,
bin full of them out there.
yeah. He does a super job on it. He's a good tire.
Oh boy, I'll say.
Yeah, he ties real nice. Yeah, there's a lot of little tricks you can do, you know, that, and that's a pretty good one. But like I say, I'm deathly afraid of it. You know, I watch 100% of the time when I'm even working with a razor blade. So, you know. But most of the mechanics of tying a hopper are pretty simple. It's a mechanical type of tie, so it's not too difficult. The let's see.
It looks like you dirtied up this monocord here, whatever it is.
That's a different kind. I was just going to say, take a look at this. These are some different macrames that I have.
Oh, okay.
There's all kind of colors and sizes and shapes and what have you. I found a place called Macrame Plus in Butte that handles all kind of macrame.
Oh, okay.
And I bought a pile of stuff there.
Macrame is us.
It's a great color. And these are all readily available at Macrame's or Us over there?
Not all of them, but some of them.
That's a great color. Because I'll use that bright yellow and then I'll take a green marking pen
You dab it
and
a little
lop
bit.
around a little bit to get.
I like that
It
one
seems
color.
so bright to me, that yellow.
I like the one color in there for the salmon fly. I think, you know, these are kind of on the bright side, this orange, you know. And I'd like to see that one real dark rust color. I love that. These in here. I think that's a perfect salmon fly color. You know, if color means anything, and it might, and if it does, that's what I'd go for.
This is nice because of the variability in it, it would seem to me. These are like, you know, a bright spot, and that's like your
There's
blended.
Yeah, there's a stonefly on the big hole sort of it's a big acronuria, and it's sort of this color right here, and that would make a nice stone because they're only about a size 8 or 6 really, and any one of these 3 colors here, in fact any of these 5 here would do a good job imitating it, but I kind of like this one right here, so I bought some and I thought, well, we'll play around with some little things and find out what goes on. Okay, let me see, maybe we'll finish up on these slides and we'll see if there's something else that some of this stuff is mechanical, what I call mechanical tying, when it doesn't take any skill, where you cut a piece of material a certain size and you do this to it and you do that to it, and it gets to be a mechanical process rather than a hands-on skill type of thing. Okay, you see that's the last one. Okay, good. Where we at now? Okay, super. Evazote, it's a closed cell foam, floats real well if you don't stretch it too much. I just read a thing in the American Angler magazine about using foam, and the guy was talking about how you cut down on the flotation properties by stretching it too much or by winding it. Naturally, if you tie a strip in and wind it down, but I've known this for a long time. In fact, my beetle that I offer in the catalog, I tie this in as a wing pack. In fact, I'll go back one. This taper in here so that I can tie in the little tapered part. And then it's all going to stretch over for a thing. Now that's bound down, and any flotation where it's wound down in there doesn't help a bit, it's no good. What I do is I segment, I cut a strip of it and I don't pull it up tight, I wind it kind of loose and I segment it so I don't take the flotation capabilities away from it. And rather than to wind over it with a thread which would bind it flat, I take a piece of black fly sheet, cut it in a very narrow strip, and go over top of it. And I'm losing a little bit by compression, but not very much. I had one of these things floating in an ashtray home for 3 months, and I figured that was good enough. I used just some thread, heavy thread, polyester thread for the legs. I stretch the back over the top and trim it off flat and then blacken it up with a felt tip marker. It doesn't hold the color forever, but it's a black, again, is a good silhouette for slick waters, and if you want to throw a beetle around sometime you can, and if you want to fish it on darker waters you can put a little piece of fluorescent stuff right where you tie the head in, a little bit of fluorescent glow bug yarn or something like that right in there, this little swatch of it on top, and it'll give you good dual visibility, black for flat water and the fluorescent for the other. Here's a simple little pattern. I come up with this a long time ago for the fire hole in Yellowstone Park. My hair spider. Elk mane, yellow thread, size A. The hackle is nothing more than cow elk body hair, not bleached. I put 5 turns around here to hold it while I cut the back end off, right square like this. And then I back off 3 turns, so that means I only have 2 turns. You notice this isn't compressed very fully, just enough to hold it in place. Notice a small indent in the hair. And then when I get 2 turns, then I flare it around and make a hackle out of it. If you look at it from the front, remember I was telling you about, it's imperative when you're making this type of fly that you spin that hair pretty good because you want it pretty much distributed evenly around the entire shank. And that's the hackle, it's made out of hair. And it imitates a crane fly when I first made it. Then I came upon a little improvement, and this fly I call my super skater. And all it is 2 bunches of that stuff with no tail. And what you do is you tie this on quite a large hook because crane flies come into a lot of sizes. On a beaverhead we have one hatch, it's a predominant hatch, quite a big fly. And if you use a very long 11 or 12 foot leader, grease it, and skitter this thing, not a lot. You skitter it maybe 2 feet and let it stop and just let it drift with the current. You skitter it about 2 feet and stop and let it drift with the current. It can be very deadly. The rises to it are very strong, the fish come up. And why? Because if you watch natural crane flies ovipositing, they'll come down and they'll lay eggs, and they'll come over here and they'll lay eggs, and they'll come over here and they'll lay eggs, and they're up here and they keep bouncing around, and they stay in maybe a 4 foot by 4 foot area. so that if there's a trout laying there and he's watching this crazy thing, big fly, I mean the body's 7/8 to an inch long, and he's watching this thing touching the water, and I know he just can't resist after a while. He comes up and gets it. We fish the fly pretty much the same way. So instead of having a spider, we have a skater now, something that'll skate real nice. And Kyle elk is really stiff. I use a natural hair that's really tough as nails. For a stonefly nymph, my big terrible trough nymph, it's down tying thread down, tie a tail in, one on each side. There's a short side of the turkey pointer quill. And while you're down there, make a tying loop for dubbing, tie in some chenille, and come up, tie the antenna in. Come back, tie 3 sets of legs, put some lead up on the upper part, wind the chenille all the way up to the head, and back down to behind the front legs because there's a very heavy thorax on the stoneflies. Notice the spinning loop still laying back there. Bring your tying thread, sort of weave it up through the stuff, and make a collar so that you have a little head on the nymph. Then you put the seal fur, black and brown mixed in that spinning loop, spin it up real nice and tight into a rope-like chenille and sort of segment it all the way up through the body. Take a pair of scissors, trim it flat on the top and the bottom, and you have a big pteronosis or stonefly nymph. I tie this on hooks as big as size 1 5X long.
Oh man, is that a crocodile or a fish?
Oh, looks like, doesn't it? Muddler. See the muddler stuck in
Yeah.
the mouth there? Yeah. Big flies, we tie some big platinum and honey blondes. This is platinum, that's a honey. This is a number 4 muddler, to give you some idea how big these are. These are tied on 3/0 Atlantic salmon hooks. 3X long, 3X heavy, but really big heavy hooks. I tie them a little unique way. I take my tinsel and double wrap it down the bend, back up for the rear portion. For the wings on here, I take 2 bunches of long bucktail, and I wind for wind like a rod winding, not too tight to flare them, but this section here will be this last section, or the first section that's tied in, and this is going to be the wing or the head, and they're both going to match up together. There's the first section being tied over. Remember that long serving of yellow thread I had? Nice taper on the front so I have room to tie a head in there. Double wrap silver tinsel down and back again. When it's all finished, this thing has a very, looking from the top, it has a very slim, thin form. But when you look at it from the side, it's got a big, big silhouette. The shape of this and the way it's tied makes it swim and waggle as it comes through the water. The big hook is important because it serves as a keel. In real heavy water, I take a couple turns of lead wire and wrap it right behind the barb so that I can ensure that this part of the hook is going to be straight down so that the fly swims properly and doesn't lay over on its side. It's pretty important on how a fly swims or how it behaves in the water if it's going to be any good. Now, something new that we've been playing with, emergers. This is what they call paratilt. A friend gave this to me, and he says it works real good. And this is a very small fly. And he said it works real good for the pale morning dun hat. And I said, gee, you have trouble floating it? He said, yeah, and it's almost impossible to see. And I could guess, he glued down and just said, you got to remember that the water level is going to be like right across here. These are going to be laying in the surface film. What's going to be sticking up are these couple little strands, John Goddard gave me this caddis, or this midge. He's got a little bit of a stillborn thing hanging out of the back, and this is turkey fibers that are wound on with a silver rib, and he takes some mesh stocking, which is an old idea, with a styrofoam plastic ball in it. Now this is one of the flies that he actually tied. This is one of the patterns that I tie for a friend of mine who goes down to New Zealand. It's a midge pattern that he really likes. A little bit of quill. The parachute wing is tied out of a ball in some stocking mesh. A little 1-inch square mesh, and you tie it on, real simple. You can tie emergers so that this thing is in the back and it floats in the surface film. And we're going to give you more about visibility. A little stillborn chuck hanging out of the back. This is that Antron wool. a number of different midge and mayfly emergers can be tied this way. You can have the thing angled back over the back or sticking out over the front. Two ways you could tie it. Notice this is tied so it sticks out over the front, and here's one that goes out over the back. We've taken a fluorescent orange marker and marked this thing for the dark green water, and that little ball is all that sticks above the water, and it looks big. The black, same thing. You can lay it back, and I have two different things. I want to show the colors, and I want to show tying it forward or tying it backward. You could also tie it in the middle and wind bases there so you can make a parachute out of it. So you can use these little beads a number of ways. I find most emergers do not float well because they really don't have anything in them to make them float well. And they water soak, you catch one fish, and what do? You have to dig out another one and tie it on. And since I started playing around with this, it works out real nice. Those things really float and float and float. You know, like I said, unless you crush and break that little poly ball up, nothing's going to happen. It's going to be in pretty good shape. But pretty good idea for doing that type of thing. And some of the bigger, nicer fish will grab something like that too. Here, I'm going to play this thing ready. Wintertime midging. Not wintertime, well, wintertime a little bit, but spring a lot. This is up on the Madison, early March, right above Reynolds Pass Bridge. And a lot of snow on the ground, and midges just profuse. There's midge activity. Look on all the snowbanks along the shore. All the little black dots, little midges all over the place. And the trout are working both on the pupa form and on the adult form. The particular days we were there, we had very little dry fly action, but we did do quite well fishing small emerger patterns.
I was standing in that very spot yesterday and the day before.
Were you?
Yeah, fishing was excellent.
Was it pretty good now?
Yeah.
Was this warm weather? A lot of
Just
midges?
Midges everywhere. They were mainly taking brassies.
Well, you'll see the copper May right there? You can see the little bit of copper went through with a flashback. You can just see a little bit of the flashback. And that's basically what we caught them on too, rather than a brassy copper. In the summertime, sometimes you get huge swarms. This is on a big hole, and this is a swarm of midges, just, you know, tremendous amount. One of the midge patterns that I use a lot is a little no-name midge, Ed Coke from back in Pennsylvania. All it is muskrat dubbing, two very small grizzly hackles, 6 turns minimum of hackle, and this is tied on a 24 hook. And there's a little teeny stuck in the mouth of a little brown. So midging can be important because there's so many. And before we close up with the types of patterns, if you've never fished an egg pattern with glow bug yarn, you might try it sometimes. If you add a little lead to the hook and make a regular glow bug thing, which aren't too tough, there's a number of ways you can dub this stuff on a tying thread, or you can tie it on and cut it off so it, you know, and you pluck the hook so the vibrations make all the little fibers stand out at right angles. But the trout will eat this thing up pretty good when they're spawning. In fact, there's days when you can't catch a fish, but you can put an egg pattern on and just catch a double out of it. I know in Poindexter Slough in the springtime when the rainbows are spawning, you can sneak in there with a little chartreuse colored egg pattern and really mock them in the head pretty good. Here's a picture of myself on a 17 pale morning dun, my favorite fishing companion.
That's brookie?
Yeah.
Whoa.
Spawning colors. That's all the slides. Okay. Yeah, we'll have lights in this. Let's see what we. Now, let's see here. One technique I want to show real fast here before we call this a day is this hair segmented body for hoppers. It's such an easy tie, but unless you see it done, like I say, some patterns are mechanical that you can tie. You know, if you see a drawing of it, there's not much of a problem. Just like I think the McHopper is one of those patterns where you can look at some pictures on how to tie it and not have a whole lot of problem doing it. Let's see. Use that. And let's see, now we'll play the game of find the other bobbin. God, I can't believe this, can you? Anybody know where it's at?
Which bobbin?
The other one. I mean, there were two bobbins here.
Oh, there's one by your lamp and
Oh,
one
that's
by
what
the.
Start to get punchy after a while. Can't imagine why. Let me see here. I don't think I have all that. Oh yeah, there's one little. Oh, there it is. Okay, one little piece of nylon, one little fine strand hooked up in there and it just refused to come. These little flare tube ceramic tip bobbins, really like them. I found out I can put a lot more pressure on them before I break anything. This is some elk flank hair dyed yellow. Makes a good body material. And this is a nice easy tie. And it lends itself to crickets, cicada. Put a winding of thread down and don't go about within an 1/8 inch of the hook shank. Depending on how big a body, depends on how much hair you put in here.
Do you have a cicada pattern that you tie?
Not a good one.
No.
No, I'm working on one.
The green in the spring, and I was kind of.
I'm working on one now, and I'm going to try some Evazote, or not Evazote, but some of the macrame, and see what I can come up with. I've got that black macrame, and I think with that black fly sheet and some black rubber legs, and a bullet head, it might end up being a pretty fair pattern. You notice I've made segments all the way down, and I came back one segment. And while I'm doing this, I just splash a little varnish on that thing. I'm turning the hook upside down for a reason. I like to, tension on this isn't as tight as normal. I like to wind this body segments upside down for a reason. If you, I can show you when I'm done here also. For every turn, then I'll move the thing in. Because what it does, it puts the segments right straight across on the belly of the fly, but on the back they're sort of diagonally across. And boy, I'm not going to bother with that tension now that I had that set up for 6/0 thread. That's why I ordered 4 more of this thing, so 5 more of them. A lot of times I identify equipment by little. I have a bunch of scissors. That little red piece of tying thread on there lets me know that that's my Goddard caddis pair. I mean, you know, you start looking for things and it's laying right in front of you sometime and you don't see it. Boy, this tension on the bobbin should be very tight compared to what it was. So now this is normally where if I had my pliers, I'd squeeze this thing flat, and I don't think I can do it with this thing here. Maybe I guess I can, but I have a pair of pliers with a jaws, so I can squeeze the thing flat so I can lay it on there. Wings. This is what I was telling you about. This is that fly sheet, and what you do is just sort of bend the thing so you have a crease in the middle. And cut a shape that you want. And you can pop it open. And you have a wing that's symmetrical on there. wings, like I say, on a grasshopper aren't, I think they're more for the fishermen than the fish, because you can't see them. The way they handle or hold their wings, you can't see them at all. And this technique here with the pointers for the legs, if you take and decide how long you want these and trim them both off at the same time, when you tie them on, if you put the butt in at approximately the same location, whoops, there we go, our towel. In the same location, both legs will be the same length, and I sort of like them so that they sort of stick out on a little bit of an angle. Okay. And then this is some small whitetail. Isn't that funny how things are laying right in front of you and they start disappearing? There gets to be so much junk out here. All the tools are out here all of a sudden. And our little stacker is great for just little clumps of stuff like this. But you're going to have to make yourself up if you do much hair work at all. You're not going to have to make up a little set of stackers like that. Now there's too much hair in here, so we'll sort of dwindle this down to a reasonable amount. And this hair is stacked again instead of being flared. It's just okay. Now if you can pull all this stuff forward, and it's just a matter of taking your scissors and making a cut across the top, or the front rather, one on the side, one on the other side, and maybe a little trim across the top, and that's the complete trimming. So this is my little hair hopper, and like I say, it lends itself to crickets. And I bet you can almost tie a cicada this way also. I had some friends that said that they fished a cicada down there with a guy that had yellow rubber legs on it.
I have no idea what really the natural looks like, so I don't really know even
Well,
what kind
I
of
do.
ballpark it is.
In fact, the guy had sent me a couple of the live ones. They were.
I mean, I've seen regular
Yeah.
cicadas, but they, you know,
They're not very big. They're about this size.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Oh, I was
and,
thinking of the
Ones like
The
that
big-
around here, those big
the
old
big
hummers.
ones that look
Oh,
like
ones in a Smith, yeah.
like water bugs. You know, they're
Yeah.
flat body and
Salmon
hard back and
Yeah, in the east we had them too. They call them 17-year-old locusts.
right,
Yeah.
exactly. And they're
Mhm.
huge things, and they make this horrible, you
Yeah.
know, piercing noise. And
Yeah, that.
that'd be a beauty on the like the Lamar or the Slough Creek, where there's a lot of very small hoppers.
That's my favorite small hopper.
Oh, that's a real good one.
Oh, yeah. I was
It's
a little
good.
disappointed that at times I thought it was sinking on me too soon, but in fast water, it doesn't matter.
It's a
No.
good
No,
stop
it-
line, too.
let her sink.
Yeah, with
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, it worked.
You know, it's amazing how many times you go down the river too, and you'll think that because you're not seeing a fish come up and take a hopper, or the conditions aren't right. Eric and I floated one day in the lower part of the Beaver Head, and we started out and we put a hopper on, and the water was really low and absolutely gin clear. And I started fishing, and I kept throwing real long casts downstream against the brush piles and what have you, against the grassy bank. And we ended up day and maybe had I don't know, maybe a dozen and a half, 15 dozen and a half fish or something like that came up, took our hopper. And, you know, we had a couple of them that were nice sized fish. I think we broke a couple hoppers off that day, if I remember. We were fishing them on 5X. We should have been on the heavier leader. But, you know, it was just, the strikes were pretty ferocious, and they got into some brush, and it was just one of those things. Anybody have any kind of questions about anything?
When do you expect to, have you found a publisher for your book?
Nick Lyons wants to do it.
Oh, great!
Yeah.
So, is there any date that you?
No, I think once I get
Discussed,
started, it'll go pretty quick.
Oh,
Like I say, I have about, about 90% of the stuff done. Since I bought a word processor, it's going to make the writing really easy. I can't believe that I've waited this long to get something.
Is it a tying manual, or is there
It's going to be fishing and
fishing and tying?
Yeah, it's going to cover hatches and designing flies. Something, I don't know. I haven't seen Borger. He's got one on designing flies. It'll be something on that order. I haven't even come up with a title yet. That's funny about titles. You never know. There's so many titles. I remember an old story about the guy who wrote a book and he didn't have a title for the book. And the guy said, "Is there anything in the book about trumpets?" The guy thought. He said, "No." He said, "Why don't you call it Without Trumpets?" Something like that. It's not going to be that bad. But I haven't thought of a name. I think if you write the book, then you think of the name. But I thought, well, I've been doing this for a lot of years and a lot of experience. And there's tons of stuff that, on sheets that you don't have. And when I was trying to get them into some sort of a good, consistent format, I finally developed a photography table that allows me to take pictures of consistent quality so that it looks like the photographs were planned rather than haphazardly done. I'd like to have the same lighting set up for everything. And the pictures, my slides I have now, a lot of them are old slides, and I've changed lighting techniques looking for what I like. I keep moving lights around. I keep a record of where I put everything. And when I find what I like and I think really looks good, then that's what I'm going to stick with. And I think I found it now. So, it's just, like I say, some of the stuff, one bunch on the emergers, I walked by my table and I accidentally kicked a cord out on my spotlight. And I got a box of slides at lunch that I reshot the emergers over with a backlight on it. And what a difference that makes. I mean, it gives you a little rim light along some of the flies that were missing on some of those, and I thought, oh, okay, great. So,
do you have a source for your like beanbag pellets, those little emerger balloons?
my wife
short of buying a whole
bought a
Buy a
beanbag
beanbag chair in the
Yeah.
garage sale.
yeah, right.
You make 10 million emergers.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know who sells those things right off the bat, but I'm gonna have to see if we have a bunch home. We bought a beanbag for the dog's bed,
Yeah.
and it was too full of bean pellets, so we took half of them out. My wife put them in some kind of a thing, and I got a big quart jar full that I used, plus a little jar on the table, and I'm sure there's a bunch of that stuff is still laying around, and I'm guessing that might be the way you have to go. Or maybe a second-hand store, or because I think we paid for the dog. This was a lot of years ago. Our dog's 14 years old. Will be 14 this year, and we paid $25 for that beanbag 14 years ago. So, and there's a lifetime supply for everybody here, but it's a great material, and the fact that you mark or color those. In fact, the new bunch of slides I shot of that stuff, I colored up instead of leaving everything white. I colored up a lot of the things on the emerger patterns to show, a little variety. But it's the best thing I've found so far for tying emerger patterns that will float after one fish. Unless you accidentally destroy that little pellet in there and smash it up or something, so it loses all its flotation power.
And this material is really basically available in like hobby.
Yeah.
It's a hobby. I've seen some fly shops that have a couple of the colors, but I also like this color and some of these colors. I'm not, I type
I don't
feel
like the bright orange.
I type
About
feel
the
like
best hopper color I've seen.
Yeah, that
Yeah,
is
that is
nice.
really.
It's variegated here,
Yeah, and with the olive
Yeah.
rear hair.
But a lot of hoppers. I photographed a lot of hoppers, and under the belly, the bellies are ivory colored. A lot of them, so that this color wouldn't be bad right here either. So, But I don't know. I think most of them come out of silhouette. And for a salmon fly, this comes closer to looking like a real salmon fly color.